Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes as people begin to flow into this webinar. So sit tight and we'll get started in 1 or 2 minutes. Hey guys, we're going to give it 1 more minute just while we're waiting. It's good to see some familiar names joining us here today. Nice to see Chris and Corey and Eula all the way in Hungary. Thanks for joining, staying up for this one. And as per usual, the chat is open or should be open, and the Q&A is also open for anyone who has any questions. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started, guys. So yes, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the copy of the recording. So anyone who needs to, hop off for whatever reason, it will be made available later, along with some key follow-up resources and some key things we'll be talking about. As I just mentioned, the chat and Q&A sections are open, so feel free to post your comments, or if you do have a specific question, pop in the Q&A for Robbie and myself. We'll certainly make some time at the end of this webinar to go through that. But today we are here to talk about conditional access. I'm joined by our Director of Product, Robbie. So thanks, Robbie, for joining us today.
Hi, everyone.
And this has been a very interesting subject in kind of the Augmentt community itself. We're very excited about conditional access and have been diving into it recently, but we've also been chatting to a lot of broader MSPs and bringing it up, and kind of realized that MSPs are busy people all the time, and technology is advancing and advancing and advancing, and conditional access is maybe more of a newer topic. Maybe there hasn't been that time to maybe get up to speed with what it is, let alone how to set it up, what the benefits are, etc. So we wanted to do a webinar that's truly focused on educating people on, okay, what exactly is conditional access? Why should you know about it? And how can you take steps towards setting that up? So without further ado, we're going to jump in and get started. Quick little agenda, guys. I mean, we're not going to take up too much of your time today, probably about sort of 20 to 30 minutes on this topic itself, and then, of course, time for the end for Q&A. But today we're going to be jumping into, first of all, what is MFA? So most people on this call, I'm sure, will know what MFA is, but just to kind of cover that at that high level, it's important to understand what that is for anybody who doesn't know what MFA is and is watching today or at a later date. Then leading us into what conditional access is, before taking a deeper look at conditional access management within M365. And then, of course, showing you some of the stuff that we're doing with Augmentt that makes that nice and easy. So first up, what is multi-factor authentication? So I remember a few years ago when this came out that people were being pretty proactive with it. And now, 4 or 5 years later, all companies are doing MFA, right? So whether it's logging into your social media, different applications that you use for work, your banks, it really is one of the first things that you should be doing to really enhance the security of a particular account or platform that you're using. And MFA, as the name would explains, is multi-factor authentication. So it's verifying your identity, so who you are. Is this George Smith that's trying to log into this particular thing, by using different factors to gain access to that resource. So MFA can be identified in several ways. Certainly back in the day, and even today, it's that classic, we can send you a text message, we can call you, but there's also dedicated apps themselves. So things like Authy or Duo, or within the realm of Microsoft, the Microsoft Authenticator app itself, as well as things now like biometrics, so facial recognition, fingerprints, just that an additional factor to authenticate who you are. And the thing with MFA is it can be kind of configured in different ways. And one of those is conditional access, which is what we're here to talk about. So moving on to that, what is conditional access? So conditional access is really good, taking MFA one step further and sort of being able to create, I guess, rules for certain situations that just give you that extra layer of security. And the first part of that is taking signals that allow sources to make that specific decision. And in the very digital and interconnected world that we all live in today, there's a different bunch of signals that we can take into account. So it can be things like, who is this user, or what group are they part of? Where are they? Like, where is the network traffic coming from? What type of application is it? What device is it? Is it a trusted device? And then even things like conditions, like user, risk, authentication workflows. So that there's lots of things happening all the time, different various sources through which you can use conditional access to make a decision. Now, the second part is actually making the decision. So what is the decision that conditional access is making? Obviously, the first and often most sought after one is allowing full access. So after authenticating, giving access to someone. But the nice thing about conditional access is you can create these policies that say, well, if it's this, this, and this, no. Maybe only give limited access, or actually block access if these things don't add up, or remediate risk. So we're going to go through that, what that looks like in a little bit more detail later on. But the four main things certainly that most people focus on whenever they talk about conditional access are devices. So whether it's a phone, a laptop, a PC, mobile, whatever it is that's the device. Is this a trusted device? Yes or no? And so that's one part that falls into conditional access. The second is location. So is this a trusted location? Is this the IP address of the corporate office that everyone's working at? In which case, yes, we can definitely create some rules and policies around that. Is it someone where they work from home? Or more importantly, hold on a second, does this fall outside of those trusted zones? Is someone logging in from somewhere random that's a little bit more suspicious? So location is very important too. Also, users and groups. So again, we understand different users have different permissions. You can then bundle users into different groups and manage whole lists of users under certain groups. And depending on who that user is, the permissions they have, or what group they're part of, you can then use that hierarchy to also build in nice workflows for conditional access. And the last thing is applications themselves, right? Sort of taking into account what software or platforms people are using and building that into the policies as well. One thing we did want to highlight, we're going to kind of circle back to this later, is that, if you're here, you're watching this, it's a great time to be thinking about conditional access, because up until now, a lot of people have, in the Microsoft portal specifically, just been using the Azure per user to set up MFA, which is good because it means you're getting MFA on. And for those who are wondering what I'm talking about, it's just going in and saying, okay, Robbie needs MFA, click Robbie, MFA is on. And that's a somewhat manual process, but at least it's ticking the MFA box. The problem is that as of September next year, so September 2025, that's going to be a legacy item. That is to say, Microsoft are making it no longer available. And so actively pushing and migrating everyone, not just MSPs, towards using alternative, more modern ways of managing and implementing MFA, one of which, of course, is policy-based through conditional access. So if that's news to you, surprise, you have a migration project on your hands, but the good news is we're here to kind of at least give you some solid understanding of what is conditional access. Is it something you want to get involved with and start implementing in your own MSP? And you've got plenty of time to do that until next September. So I'm going to run a quick little poll here, guys. Let me get this set up. So we've got a poll here about conditional access policy usage. I'm just going to launch that. You should see that coming up on your screen. The poll for anybody who's watching us in the future is, are you using conditional access policies for MFA and M365 today? Options are yes or no, it's too scary, no, but planning on using it, or I still don't even know what the heck it is. So we'll give it another 15 seconds there, just let all the votes come in and see where we land. Okay, so it looks like Everyone's voted there. So answer overwhelmingly, which is great. 78% of people, Robbie, voted yes, which is great. With 2% saying no, just under 20%, so 19% not today, but planning, and 2%, I still don't understand what the heck it is. There's one person on the call who still doesn't know, so if you're that person, feel free to reach out to Robbie and I directly. We're happy to go into some more detail or ask your questions in the chat.
Don't call them out though.
Yeah, it's actually me. All right, so we'll stop sharing that and over to our next slide. So Robbie, I'm going to kick over to you to talk a little bit about something called security defaults versus conditional access. So maybe you can help us understand what security defaults is, first of all, and then kind of talk a little bit more about some of the conditional access stuff. Because even when I was researching this myself, yeah, I found it a little bit confusing.
Yeah, we wanted to set up the stage before we jump right into the conditional access stuff, and you can go to the next slide to talk about some of the defaults that are in place, right? So if you have a very old tenant and you never turned on security defaults, it's possible that's simply disabled for you, and you can go and turn that on, and that will be an option of migration away from the legacy MFA. But generally, it brings some good value in terms of security, right? So if you've read or haven't, but the product manager that developed the security defaults put out a very big blog post around how they were rolling this out, why they were rolling this out. Great comparisons to actually seat belts, right? Where it's like we had to impose it on people so that they make better decisions. And so slowly they started imposing MFA on environments, and that caused a better adoption, but they were still at a very low rate of something like 20% across complete environments when they include the non-corporate data as well. So just, your regular like Outlook accounts and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of benefits to security defaults, including, by default, it'll force you to do a multi-factor authentication. It'll block legacy auth. It's got additional controls for admins. It's got file sharing controls as well. But there are some, if you're trying to, figure out a plan moving away from legacy, because MFA is obviously one of the primary things we can do in terms of securing the environment. It's not all sunshine and rainbows when we turn on security defaults. So we've got, plenty of MSPs who have told us that they had security defaults, and so they were curious why accounts weren't registered. And simply put, Microsoft adds a layer of logic, and behind closed doors, will choose when they may or may not apply multi-factor authentication to an environment versus you being able to set very strict rules of, in these conditions do it, in these conditions don't do it, because I've put these other practices around it that will make it safe. So there are definitely some limitations there. And one of the core limitations, though, is that it has no exception factor as well.
So
So if
Robbie,
you have, go ahead.
just a quick question. So security defaults within Microsoft, it's kind of almost like here's the bare minimum of stuff you should be doing. It's kind of like the low-hanging fruit in a way. Is that fair
It's
to
de
say?
it's definitely their version of minimum code, which can be disabled. Absolutely.
But it's still something that MSPs or the global admins have to actually go on and turn on themselves, right?
New tenants are enabled by default. Legacy tenants may not be.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say there were some limitations around sort of different ifs and buts, maybe?
Yep. Yeah, I lost my my train of thought on that one, but there are definitely limitations. Oh, around exemptions.
Right.
So some examples of this are if your customers have legacy applications that need to, log in through systems or use legacy authentication protocols, you have to disable security defaults in order to allow those through. But by disabling security defaults, you're also disabling a lot of other controls. And some of the only ways to put those controls back into place will be to upgrade licensing, unless you want to leave a semi-vulnerable environment. And I mean, it was mentioned in the chat, that we need to know my clients aren't licensed for it or aren't willing to pay for it in the poll. But I think that's what you guys need to start doing as, VCIOs of your clients, and being their technology experts, is not giving them a simple out on these practices, and you'll have the tough job of showing them why they're in a critical position if they aren't either enabling security defaults or putting strong conditional access policies in place.
Yeah, and the key thing I'm taking away from your comments there, Robbie, is the lack of flexibility as well. Like you can turn these on and set them up, but there's going to be instances where they're going to have to turn them off in order to process something and then turn them back on. There's kind of a lack of smart modern logic behind them in some spaces.
Yeah, the limitation. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Microsoft is in it to make money, so they've put some kind of bare bones thing in play, and if you want to get more flexibility, you have to pay to play.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's where conditional access kind of comes in, right? If you want to move on to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about that.
Let's skip ahead. And, I'm not taking credit for any of these here. We, talk to MSPs on the daily, and I see patterns that MSPs leverage. We're trying to give you guys insights on, maybe what's some of the more successful MSPs that leverage our tools are using, so that you can repeat, well-known patterns that work well. And additionally, we're leveraging, as you can see in the credits here, very specific people that you can just go ahead and search for them. You'll find them on LinkedIn. You'll find their page. They have a blog article I'll gladly show after, where we're taking some of these recommendations to, kind of show to you and introduce to you from very smart people who do this for a living and, have the credentials to back it up. So I've put my little cool faces on there to somewhat indicate, level of effort, right? So MFA for everyone is an easy policy to put in place as long as you have the licensing, and it's going to create a little bit of turmoil if they didn't already have security defaults and they need to set up MFA. Like, expect some calls at your help desk for people needing help setting it up. I think blocking device code flow is actually interesting. I hadn't considered it until recently when I was looking at some blogs, and I think it's an interesting one. So for those who don't know, when you do things like, say, register your Google account, and then you take a screenshot of a QR code and it registers it through your logged in device, right? That's a device code flow. So it's used for IoT devices, web apps, so on and so forth. So, blocking those out so that you don't have all these apps easily registering in the environment is actually a very good. And the nice thing is that it's least likely to impact users, but for those who would use it, potentially by mistake or nefariously, it'll be blocked out, which is great. And then they'll call help desk, and then you can tell them why they can't do it, or you can put a policy that allows a specific use case that's actually needed. Like sometimes you'll have, those little Zoom devices in your actual office that you're trying to authenticate. You would be able to do that. I think we all know what legacy authentication is, but if you don't, if you have the old version of Exchange and such applications, they'll essentially be blocked by these policies. Enforcing device compliance, I left that there because it's a strong recommendation. It's obviously an enterprise recommendation, right? We all know that with working from home, with a lot of smaller businesses, that you use your own device, and they may or may not take the device under management. If you're lucky, they may simply allow you to register and take apps under management rather than the whole device. So this won't apply for everyone, but if you have some of those corporate offices where they give you devices, then I see no reason why you wouldn't enforce device compliance so that people aren't doing a bunch of BYOD on things that they shouldn't. I left number 5 there because it was interesting, and you'll be able to, look it up on his blog. This specifically, the Magnificent 8 are from John, and then my number 9 and 10 bonus items are from Merrill Fernando, both in the credits there. He had a strong reason why MFA and enrollment of Intune was necessary, but the current implementation from Microsoft didn't allow it to be elegant. And so he's removed it for now, and I'm sure, you know, he's probably talking to them being an MVP, and we'll find better use cases someday. But it's nice to see those blogs kind of constantly updated as these MVPs are managing environments and seeing pitfalls. So obviously that's not one of the ones we'll walk through today. Require phishing resistant auth for admin portals, right? So even though we're doing MFA for everyone, you want stronger MFA for people with privileged access. And so that's a very nice use case there. Token protection for managed devices, right? Creating that kind of encryption level communication between devices and the environment is actually very cool. Obviously requires additional licensing. So and some Intune management configuration as well. So definitely one of the more complex ones to configure. I believe it needs specific filtering, custom filtering to be put in place. But if you're trying to really lock things down, probably one of the nicer things you can do versus having kind of man in the middle attacks with device impersonation and such. Require phishing resistant MFA for trusted devices. I like that one a lot. And then register security information from trusted locations. So we've actually experienced this here, not Augmentt itself, but our customers. We've literally had more than one MSP say that their client had additional devices registered against a user unknowingly, and that's how they were hacked. And, you know, being able to put this behind a trusted location, actually require MFA in order to do security registration, then you'll say, okay, but what if they're registering their first device? Well, one-time password actually counts and satisfies MFA, right? So they call the help desk, they get their one-time pass, they do a successful login from a trusted location, they're now two-factor authenticated, then they can register security information. So this is one way of making things a lot more secure and not allowing additional devices to be registered. And then if you can't live in the realm of everyone's got a compliant device, at a minimum, let's strive for admins having compliant devices.
Yes, it's a solid list, and there's just some people in the chat asking about it. Just to make it clear, guys, at the end of the webinar, we'll actually post the link to the blog written by John, which is called "The Magnificent 8 Conditional Access Policies." He does a fantastic job of kind of explaining in layman's terms, as Robbie has done, what each of these are. He then actually includes screenshots and guides of where to find them and how to set them up. And even for some of the more complex things, that there's how-to guides and walkthroughs as well. So if anyone wants to dive in this afternoon or later this week, highly recommend checking out that blog. But yeah, it's it is interesting, kind of just coming back to security defaults with it being the bare minimum, but inflexible. Like obviously we do want everyone to have MFA on and things like blocking authentication protocol or legacy authentication protocols, but conditional access really lets you go one level deeper and cover so much more ground in different scenarios in what is the ever evolving and more complex IT landscape with the different scenarios people and requests people are having on a day-to-day basis. Another thing that's come up in the comments that we did want to highlight as well is, yes, part of the consideration with conditional access is it does sit behind a paywall. So conditional access is granted through the acquisition or purchase of a business premium license. One of the questions maybe, Robbie, we can speak to, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, because it's a great question that comes from, where did I see it? Peter, just around the idea that a lot of people are using business standard and no conditional access policies are something that is in business premium. Peter said, for small customers using 365 business standard, so not having any conditional access, we mentioned that September 2025 is the migration from legacy MFA to policy-based. So even if they already have all users on MFA, but without conditional access, how will this be affected? Do you have any insight into that at all, Robbie? I know it's something that's still kind of ongoing, but it's a great question from Peter.
Yeah, here's our take on it. Microsoft, as far as I've yet to see, and if anyone's got additional information, new information, send it up our way because we'd love to disseminate it to as many people as possible. Was not very specific in what your next step should be based on what licensing your customer has. I think that it basically you make the decision of go back to security defaults or upgrade to P1 licensing or P1 equivalent licensing, and then set up your conditional access. Like I believe those are your choices until Microsoft comes out and says differently.
Yeah, no, definitely a good question. And it also just kind of raises the ongoing conversation around business premium, which is something we have a lot of thoughts and conversations on here at Augmentt as well, which is, often a problem whenever you bring up business premium with your clients is your clients just hear the word premium and they go, I don't really like that word. And my Excel works fine and my PowerPoint is just great. I don't need the premium Microsoft. And so, MSPs have to take responsibility and take the onus to really show and educate their clients that a Microsoft Business Premium license isn't about enhancing the functionality of the productivity suite that they have access to. It's about granting you, their IT expert, additional security capabilities that are going to drastically reduce their risk. And that's something in a separate conversation we can discuss about how Augmentt kind of like shows that through some nice dashboards about here's all the different things that Microsoft say should be on, but that aren't. And it's not because we're being lazy or can't do them. It's literally unlocked by this license, and that's why we want to upgrade you to this service, because all of a sudden it unlocks these 12, 24, however many additional things that are going to rapidly increase your security score. So part of the problem there.
Let's tackle another quick question before we move on. So someone asked if the Magnificent 8 will be part of the security posture. I would say about 60% is already covered. I plan on adding them as baseline templates into Augmentt shortly. So hey, sneak peek or teaser, we're going to be building some out-of-box conditional access templates. That's already in the works. So it will at least be there for deployment. And then I believe we will, create the security checks at some point. But I'd say like the majority of them are already included, and a few of the ones I'd consider like token protection and enforcing compliance for all devices, those aren't currently part of that. I don't think many organizations would satisfy those yet, or even want to. Another question. So I see a P2 requirement for a feature from a technical perspective. I think we need one license. Where does Microsoft stand on that? And what I'll say is, Augmentt doesn't check that you're doing things correctly before leveraging it. We ping an API, and if it replies, hurrah. But on that front, go check the Microsoft terms of use, and clearly, specifically, you're supposed to license every user. There's no way around that. Don't be cheeky about it. It's not going to benefit you in the long run. So, we won't stop our product from trying to work because we see that you don't have enough licenses. That just puts a lot of effort on us for no reason. We hit an API, it replies with answers. We make awesome display of information and recommendations. We do have checks in our portal for whether you have the right amount of licenses and such. So we do highlight it for you. We don't try to hide that stuff.
Yeah, Matthew said it best there in the chat as well. Microsoft requires every user using a functionality needs to be licensed for it. So
yep. Okay. I think we'll jump in. Yep.
Sure. I'll hand over to you, Rob. You can share your screen.
So what we'll do now is, a little exercise of walking through, and we can, George can interrupt with any questions you have, and we'll do our best to show you in the Microsoft portal how we do this stuff. So again, we're not just trying to say, hey, Augmentt's the only way to do things. We'll actually use the Microsoft portal to put some examples together as we click through this. So If you haven't done so before, simple policy, right? Let's require MFA for all. So I should back up a little bit. So we've talked about the licenses. We know why we want to do this. We know that Microsoft has a secure score recommendation, and there are many, many items in that secure score that actually require you to implement conditional access to satisfy those scores. So there are things that you'd have to replicate in conditional access. And I think that touches back on someone's point where they said, um, if I disable security defaults, do I essentially have to replicate all of the settings? Not all of the things that security defaults does are controlled by conditional access, but I believe it may undo or turn off settings that were essentially managed by security defaults. And there are things that can be done in multiple ways. So you can run PowerShell scripts to disable legacy authentication across the individual apps behind the scenes. There's no buttons for it though. Or you can do it through conditional access where there are buttons and a way to replicate it easily across tenants. So those are definitely considerations you need to take in place. So what else did we want to touch on? If you're managing this for clients, obviously we know that GDAP is Microsoft's best recommendation in terms of managing your tenants. You should hopefully over time move away from having admin credentials is what they want us to do as a best practice, leaving the power and ownership to the end client so that they can cancel you at any time. If they need to lock you out for security purposes, they cancel the relationship, you lose full access. And that's essentially best practice. It's not always the most convenient practice. And we know sometimes the tools fall apart. But when it comes to GDAP, so you need either the security admin relationship, or you can specifically get the conditional access roles within your relationship in order to access these parts of the product. So I thought I'd call that out as well. So now that we've jumped in the portals, I think everyone knows where Entra is. So you go to your identity portal, you jump into Entra. Within Entra, if you have the right licensing, your protection tab will show up with your conditional access, and you've got your list of policies and your named locations out here, and we'll touch on those in a moment. So while this is what we'd consider an intrusive policy, hopefully people are used to it by now, but you'd want everyone to get MFA in the first place. So if we were to create a simple policy for that, you jump into what users are going to be affected. We're going to target every single user. We're going to exclude potentially specific users and groups, right? In this case, pretend this is my break glass account. You probably have one. I'll say that Microsoft is moving away from the break glass without MFA recommendation. They're moving more towards having a key associated to it so that it can always get in, but get through MFA. So it'll take time, I think, before everyone moves towards that realm. But until then, let's make sure we don't forget to make an account that can get in regardless, and we can safeguard it in other ways. And then you have your grant controls. So this is how you tell the environment, based on the settings I chose here, if someone satisfies these, what do I want to do with that user? Do I want to block them, or do I want to grant them access? Right, so someone may satisfy a set of conditions, and those conditions mean you actually don't want them, right? So someone satisfies a login from Russia. Well, I'm not letting them in. This is not always a set of conditions that mean good. It can be a set of conditions that mean bad. So in this case, I'm going to say what we're going to do is grant access for all users, and we're going to exclude the break glass account, which means it bypasses this policy completely. And they'll require multi-factor authentication. And if I was selecting multiple controls, I can say I want them to satisfy at least one of these, or I can say you must satisfy every one of these before you're admitted. So I'll close this out. Are any questions popping up on this?
Not that I can see specifically, Robbie.
Okay, so let's run through legacy authentication. I think another very straightforward one, right? And the key is just knowing where Microsoft has hidden some of those conditions. So again, something that targets all users. In this case, I wouldn't even put exclusions. And under my conditions, we have our client apps, and you have your legacy authentication clients. So Microsoft has essentially put them all behind the hood and said, we know what they are, and it's all these Exchange ActiveSync clients and these other clients. We consider them legacy. We know when they try to log in that they're a legacy client. And so, here's where they are. So this will be no by default. You actually have to enable this, select these, and that is your typical legacy authentication. And then what we're saying here is we're going to block access. And that means that anyone who comes in with one of those legacy clients will be blocked. So then they'll be forced to go use a newer, more modern client that does multi-factor authentication. So be careful with these policies, right? I'll throw an example. If you've got a veterinary's office and they have some legacy application, and this application talks to some service within Microsoft, you've just killed it if they don't support legacy authentication, modern authentication. And you'll have many of these apps that unfortunately don't. And so this is where you have tough conversations to have. You're either going to recommend that they use a newer modern app that, if you're identifying applications that have legacy, they're either very niche or they're probably not using the most efficient app in the first place. And, as the VCIO, hopefully you can help them on their technology needs and show them that you can make their work more effective with new and better tools. Not everyone's ready to make those investments, though. So do keep that in mind, and that might be where you need to make some concessions and exceptions.
There was one question, Robbie, that came through from Keenon. He's asking, on audit only, where do you find the audit?
I've thought of trying to demo that. It is not simple. So Microsoft basically records all the sign-in logs, and you could go through the sign-in logs and you will see there if the policy would have applied, but that requires some very, very manual investigation. Now, Microsoft does have a recommendation on how to set this up, and I haven't done it myself. I know we've set it up for testing purposes at Augmentt once, and what you do is you set up a database. I think there's a couple of options, and then there's a way to pipe a bunch of reports to it, and then that can generate your output of the audits. It's super convoluted, and I'm probably not doing it justice in its explanation, but that's how convoluted it is. I could tell you that we're thinking of a way to simplify that, but that does not exist in our product yet. So,
well, Robbie, it seems like conditional access can get pretty lengthy. I mean, we're seeing an example there of, over 100 policies, and granted, this is sort of our little play sandbox in Microsoft, but even if we take a step back and think about it, two of the examples you use there, you can create conditions that say you have to meet all of these things in order to get access. That's one type. But in the very same way, there can be a separate policy that says, well, if you do any of these things, we're going to revoke access. And I guess it almost becomes like this kind of conditional access policy Rubik's Cube. That's how I picture it. In my mind, there's all these different variables based on who the person is, what type of group they are. Well, those are good, but they're in the wrong location. Actually, we've changed that. They're neither in the right location, but they're using a device that's not the right device. So there's all these different ifs and buts that kind of need to line up in order for someone to get access. And that's good because that points to strong security. But under the hood, whenever we're looking at it, that there's a tremendous amount of different policies to create and manage within Microsoft, it seems like.
Yeah, you're kind of segue me into this tool here. It's a preview tool, and I won't pretend to be an expert of it, but essentially you're saying, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if we try to log in this way? And so check out that tool from Microsoft, and you may have to do some additional reading, but I definitely have messed with this in the past. And, basically I can say, okay, what if I log in as myself? If I could type. So I'll select myself as a user, and then I can add conditions to myself. So I'm testing permutations of things, right? What if I pretended to log in from another country? What if I pretended to log in with different applications? What if I pretended to log in with a device that's compliant or not compliant, etc.? What if my, user risk was high? Did I build my policies right to either prevent me from logging in or successfully logging in when I wanted to? And then you click the little what if button, and it tells you what's going to apply against you, what would have blocked me, right? So I'm a global admin in our test environment, and as one of the Magnificent Eight, I should require anti-phishing MFA from my admins, and so I do. And I actually enhanced the recommendation to say, let's set a session control of sign-in frequency every single time. I don't want persistent sessions in the environment. So that would affect me. So that's a nice little tool that can help identify which is another way of looking at it versus looking at the sign-in logs. The sign-in logs have their own value because you're not going to go test 100 users probably. And what the sign-in logs will catch is the device you actually forgot about, this legacy application you forgot about, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I like that what if feature. Again, it gives a nice visualization that there's maybe half a dozen different policies. It could, you could be as a user getting put through in order to get access granted, and you could fail on one of those based on whatever metrics there or data points they're considering. So being able to I guess run a test of that and consider how you might want to adjust something based
Yeah,
on
and
that is
and
super
if I
handy.
touch back on that very quickly, um, what we have here as well is the policies that didn't apply, and it'll actually tell you why it didn't apply. So now you can go look at those specific settings. There might be a user exclusion or something of the sorts that's saying, oh, that's why you were able to get through, or you satisfy these things, and hence this policy doesn't apply to you.
Very cool.
Um, so let's see how we would do something like device compliance. This has, I think I put that with a couple of extra cool dudes on it because device compliance, one, will mean in-tune licensing and will mean that you've actually configured device compliance policies. You've enrolled a device as well. So this definitely has more intricate settings, but on the conditional access part, it's not extremely complicated. So again, we want to target all users, and we're going to look at our conditions. We'll include all devices, and this is the complexity with Microsoft. Sometimes you forget where things are. Oh yes, require device to be marked as compliant in order to grant access. And so from here on, and then they'll give you these little warnings as well, right? So do I want to exclude these platforms, etc.? Note that when you do this, you have to choose. So in this case, I chose all devices, which means that an iOS device won't log in unless I go and create a device compliance targeting iOS devices, and it has to be enrolled for that device and has to become compliant. So what is compliance? Well, when you create those device compliance configurations, you can say requires the firewall to be enabled, must have BitLocker enabled, so on and so forth. And then if all those things are satisfied, the device becomes compliant, and only now are we allowing it to log into the environment. So those are ways of really locking things down so that if someone steals a token and the device tries to come through, and they have some generic laptop of sorts. It's not going to be a compliant device in the environment, so they have a lot more things they need to spoof to be able to get through, and that definitely makes you more protected than the next environment.
Conditions to satisfy.
So let's create another quick policy together. So we're going to build one from scratch. What we want, so I recommended, one of the things we should do is probably register security information only from trusted locations. So this is going to require a new part of the resources called the named locations. So what you're doing with named locations is you're specifying either countries or IP addresses. And then when it comes to IP addresses, obviously you could say, I'm making a list of bad IPs, or I'm making a list of good IPs. So IPs, because it's harder to know what an IP is off the top of your mind like that, Microsoft basically lets you specify one as trusted. So now I know, okay, this is my corporate IP, right? Public IP, because we're talking about external facing things here. And so sometimes you'll see you use a overseas help desk of sorts. And so we can specify their IP address as safe rather than saying the whole country is safe. So let's go and create a conditional access policy based on that. So hopefully I don't miss any steps here. I want this to target all users, and for security device registration, and so I'm targeting the resources of user actions register security information, right? So that's doing MFA registration. So again, this is the use case I said earlier, where we literally have MSPs with clients that got their MFA stolen. That's one of the reasons Augmentt won some clients, and it's one of the reasons that other ones have then come back and used Augmentt's conditional access management to put in best practices because it actually happened to their client. Then we want to put network information. So you'll notice this is brand new. If you go to conditions, you have locations somewhere. Well, it doesn't matter right now, but they're, oh yeah, locations right here. And it's a duplicate of network. So they're moving it over and it'll eventually disappear from the other place. I think it's in both places, just, legacy Microsoft things as they transitioned. So I'm going to say, yes, I want to select a network. I'll select a very specific one. And in my case, I'll pick, this trusted location. And so now I'll go to my grant control, and that's going to be grant access. And I'm going to say I require multi-factor authentication on that. Actually, require authentication strength, because this can be satisfied by that one-time passcode. So now what you're going to get is someone has to be in a specific location or specific set of IPs, or maybe you'll expand it to a country depending on your circumstance. They'll have to call in, get a one-time passcode from someone to satisfy the multi-factor authentication. Then they'll be able to log in, and then they can register their device through MFA. So a lot harder to be stolen. So we'll select this. We'll create that.
And just while Robbie's typing that up, guys, if anyone does have any questions, just feel free to drop them in the Q&A while we're in here.
Yep, so that's the walkthrough. So we've now created that policy. And
There we
now
go.
more secure.
Well, thanks, Robbie. I mean, I'm self-confessed not very technical, but it's amazing that Microsoft has the capabilities to do this and folks can go in. But I would say, like, at least for me, it doesn't seem significantly intuitive, and there's a lot of work to be done, right, to get these set up, right? And then that's just for one tenant, correct?
Well, exactly, right. Obviously, we're at Augmentt, we try to make things more simple, but if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 policies right now, what I actually see from our typical MSPs will be 7 or 8 policies. They'll do a couple of things that are like specific to internal users, that kind of stuff. Stuff for break glass accounts as well. So geolocate or geofence a break glass account will typically appear. And actually, you'll see a different pattern. Many of you are probably doing 0-1 MFA, 0-2 block legacy auth, etc., just to show them in a specific order you're looking for. That is like the typical thing I see from our customers.
Oh, you got a question coming in?
Yep.
Can I set a policy to block access from all other locations other than trusted for users being able to action for registering security info from Prabhat?
You can definitely set a policy that would block access from all other locations. So you'd have one specifically for registering security information, and then you would have, or you could do, it's probably not the best practice, but you could say block access from all these locations, and then once having security information registration a bit more open rather than geolocated.
Gotcha. Okay, well, thanks for taking us through that, Robbie. It's always interesting, having someone like yourself who's got a good bit of experience in the Microsoft portal, kind of walking through some bits and pieces. Let me get my slides back up here. I would say, I mean, like, as I've mentioned, like, I'm not a technical person, but I can definitely see some of the challenges that, and also that I've heard from MSPs when it comes to implementing conditional access. I mean, the first one is it's complicated. This is not an easy thing to do. And I'm assuming, Robbie, as well, there's, you need to be someone with a certain amount of technical ability as well as permissions, right? You're not having L1s go in and update conditional access policies that are going to change how people can and cannot get access to things, right?
Preferably not. I mean, the anecdotes we have is that conditional access is fairly complex. Usually we see, the SOC, NOC, L3 guys, depending on how you guys are set up, handling this stuff. And we've got plenty of anecdotes of like a junior technician getting access and breaking things, or removing MFA for the CEO because he forgot his phone, but then it never gets put back in, so on and so forth. So a ton of anecdotes around that. And yeah, I think you want to try and guard your conditional access.
Well, you mentioned it
sure.
there as well. I mean, that's the fear is not, well, the fear is maybe someone junior breaking things, but also locking somebody out by accident, like the CEO of your top client. That's definitely a fear that I've heard from many MSPs is, they're terrified of getting that phone call from their main partner who themselves is at a very important pitch or meeting and all of a sudden can't access their Microsoft environment or get the files or folders or whatever it is they need, and they're blowing up on the phone to the help desk. And then, like you say, some poor junior guy just panics and gives them access to everything or removes MFA completely, and that doesn't get logged anywhere. And so things can quickly spiral out of control. But there's definitely a fear around locking people out by accident and the repercussions of that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, people can definitely join in with their anecdotes, but the reality is the way most people do things today is they'll have a set of operating procedures written up in their documentation tool. So, internally you're on a test environment, you've probably created all the policies you need, and now you're trying to write down the Microsoft UI in a way that you can reproduce it somewhat consistently. Well, or consistently, but that doesn't always happen, right? That's where the mistakes happen. And Microsoft changes the verbiage, changes their UI, and you're having to keep your documentation updated. And of course, you try not to miss something as you're standardizing along, right?
Well, that's it.
Which is the complexity. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the third thing I was going to bring up is you're doing this on a tenant by tenant basis, right? So you go and you say most MSPs we see have maybe 6 to 7 different policies that they're setting up, and that takes time to do. It's a manual and somewhat complicated process. But then you've got to log out, clear your cache, and log in to your second tenant and repeat that process all over again. right? For however many tenants you manage, maybe it's a dozen, maybe it's 50. And so that just seems like a incredibly cumbersome job where, yeah, there's so much room for human error in trying to just recreate those same conditional access policies across multiple tenants.
Yep.
Yeah, so those are some of the challenges that we certainly hear about. And so, at Augmentt, we're obviously, as Robbie said, always trying to make things easier. And so one of the things we wanted to share for those of you who weren't aware of it today is around some of the conditional access functionality within Augmentt today. So one of the first things we'll talk about, and Robbie will actually go in just a second and show all this in the environment itself, but we wanted to talk about like baselines and playbooks, right? So being able to actually create some of these these policy baselines within a few clicks. So bundling essentially different policies together, saving it, and then being able to have this baseline library that then you can rapidly deploy out. Robbie, am I kind of anything else you want to add to that there? This is something I know you and the team have been working on really hard this past year.
I was gonna jump in and just say, like, let's be candid here. Like, we're trying to obviously give you guys great content into, look, if you're not interested in Augment right now, you're just trying to learn. I think we've walked through the portal. We're happy to answer the questions. This is the part where we obviously think we have a better way of doing things. And I mean, there's a zillion tools out there that can increase value on top of what Microsoft offers. And that's what we're now talking about, which is we think there's a better way to manage your conditional access.
Yeah. So one of those, as I mentioned, is creating those baselines and playbooks, first of all, but then giving you the ability to be repeatable and consistent in actually applying those. So deploying them through Augmentt without fear of breaking things. And then most importantly, one of our recent additions to the platform, something that I'm super excited about, is the idea of this time machine. So being able to actually roll back different policies. So if someone does implement something or there's something not quite working as you wanted to, you can instantly revert back to a previous instance as things were before. Couple that together with sort of the drift monitoring. So the idea that if you've set up something, this is your baseline standard, and all of a sudden there is a decrease in compliance of that standard. So something deprecates, something gets turned off by accident. Instead of waiting until it all falls apart a month later and you only realizing that because something bad happens, Augmentt will actually provide alerts to say, hey, there's been a decrease in compliance to this baseline you've set. Do you want to go and take a look at it and fix it? And giving you guys the heads up on what's happening there. So Robbie, those are some slides. I'll kick it back to you. Maybe you can just quickly jump into the platform and give people a little bit of a whirlwind tour of what the conditional policy access manager looks like in Augmentt.
Yep. So, we just showed you the policies existing in my environment, and we just created this new, register security information policy. I know there were 100 policies I've already filtered out for my Augmentt related ones, right? So what do we want to do actually? If I create a policy in one environment and I want to actually recreate it in another environment, that's some of the work MSPs typically have to do, right? You're not maintaining one enterprise environment where the portal is probably perfectly fine. You're maintaining dozens, hundreds. So what I would do in this case, right, is I've got my policy here. It exists on this tenant, right, Augie's dev, but I want to put it elsewhere. So let's actually bring it into Augmentt permanently so I don't lose it. So even if I delete it from my environment, it'll be in Augmentt. So I'll create a template out of it so that I can reuse things. Right, so here's my policy, and I can add a description to it, right? So actually, I will prepared myself for this one. There we go. And we even have a nice little URL to learning stuff. So we're leaving that, nice details for the next technician's going to have to do these things. So what have we done now through Augmentt? So I'm basically going to say, okay, including specific users, we're going to force registration from these accounts and these conditions. And so when I come to the next page, we're actually sanitizing the policy, because if you'll remember, I did things like exclude include specific locations. That was a location that exists in my tenant, not my customer's tenant, and it's not going to exist there. But they probably have, well, the whole point of this policy is to force them from their trusted location. So how do we carry that over? Right, that's a Microsoft GUID in the back end that's not going to carry over to their IP versus mine. So what Augmentt does is sanitizes that out of the policy, and we put it in a playbook instead, so that when you deploy the policy, you can actually choose it, the tenant-specific values from their environment. So I've got my exclusions here that are required. So, I'm going to say exclude, actually, sorry, it's built in to exclude guests or external users. So they cannot go and register security information, right? We don't want them to do that in our environment. And it's built in. And then exclude locations. So, sorry, include locations. So let's create that policy in Augmentt. Now, another neat feature that we have is that we can create custom baselines. So what I've already done is put all of the other policies we talked about. I've imported them earlier. You saw them all in my environment, and I built them in a baseline. So now I'm not saying, hey, junior tech or someone, oh, go and set up the baseline on this environment. And they go, that's this policy, that other policy, third policy, fourth policy. It's this baseline, right? So what I'm going to do is edit my baseline, search for this new policy that I made, and now it's included in my custom baseline.
So Robbie, just to back up for a second, if I'm a brand new MSP setting up Microsoft for brand new customers, and then I'm an Augmentt partner as well, do I need to first create the conditional access policy itself for the first time in the Microsoft portal, and then I can import it to Augmentt?
Let's talk about today versus real soon. Today, absolutely. Set up a single environment one time, make it work, import them in Augmentt. They'll be imported in a way that are replicable. And as you saw, you can set required or optional inputs for that deployment process. So build your playbook so that you can replicate it consistently with the right settings.
Got it.
Very
So
soon.
create your golden tenant almost, and
Yeah.
then import that to Augmentt so you can rapidly push it by creating those baselines, as you say. And for us, like a baseline is where you're able to put in different conditional access policies, bundle them together so that an L1, instead of having to go and even do those one by one, can just say, here's this baseline template to push to everyone.
Yep. And the nice thing is, a lot of things out there will say create a golden tenant, and that's your one opportunity to replicate across tenants. You can create as many templates in Augmentt as you like, and as many baselines as you like. One thing that's really nice, and it's what we actually do on our Augmentt managed service, because we know that you're not going to get onto a brand new client and like lock the place down with all the recommendations I have here. They'll get stuck, right? It's too much at one time. So we'll do things like block legacy off. You can start introducing MFA, maybe adding a few things around trust, registration, and you can work your way up by moving up to a baseline level 2, level 3 over time, and you get to define them, what that rollout is that looks, functional to you essentially.
Are there any considerations? This is actually a really good question from Chris Potts. So thank you, Chris. Just around being able to replicate those policies across different tenants. Are there any considerations around the sort of users and groups? Like, is that something you have to go back into Microsoft to update back in the portal, because different tenants have different users and groups?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of what we've done here versus, I'm sure some of you have used Lighthouse as an example, right? So if you try to create Lighthouse baselines, you'll get a nice red banner at the top that's if you have a group or a specific user or a location, an app even, that'll say, hey, this GUID, and they won't tell you what it is. It gives you this long GUID. So it's like, that's not going to exist over there. So make sure you wipe that out. And so the way you do baselines in Lighthouse is you make them very standardized. There's settings that apply all, right? They use these all values, the none values, or the built-in values. And then once you've replicated it, then you can go and touch up every single policy if you want to exclude a specific user, so on and so forth. So what we've done, let us walk us through a deployment, right? So right now I'm on Augie's dev. I'll go pick another tenant. I've only got one policy here, just so something shows up. And I want to actually go deploy a baseline. And it's going to run through all of these. Now, most of these I've specifically set up for, for demo purposes, and that's probably because you'd want to do it this way anyway, where they don't have required inputs. But as we just saw, this one does have a required input. So we'll get prompted along the way as we're deploying this. So let's see here. We'll click. We've got required inputs over here. I got to, yes, exclude my break glass account. So we'll pretend that this is a break glass account. So I've included the break glass account that must be excluded. Okay, where else do I have things to fill in? Over here, I'm at 1 of 2. I've got my exclusions already built in, but I need to pick a specific location. So this answers the question of if it was a group, a user, any of that, they'll show up here. So I'm going to include Canada as a safe location. What else am I missing here?
Robbie, do you mind if we just turn your camera off for a second? I think just some people aren't able to see the widescreen format, maybe. So we just want to, if you turn your camera off, maybe we'll get more access to the screen.
I think it's hiding my. Is it hiding my options right now?
If you hover down.
This guy. Does that help? I don't know if it will. I'm missing an include. I think I built a bad policy here. What did I do? Include no users. Yeah, I built a bad policy. That can happen as well. This is how you lock yourself out of Microsoft, but not Augmentt. Luckily, because we've put validation in place. So let me go edit this and just kick out that one policy that I built badly. And then we can go deploy it again. So again, I don't lock myself out. I didn't even plan that, but here's my Canada location. Now we can proceed. It's going to deploy four policies in a row. I'll be able to go fix my fifth one and re-include it in my baseline. We don't have to wait for that to deploy, but essentially it'll push them out to Microsoft. We'll resynchronize them here so you can see they're in the midst of synchronization. It'll take a little bit and they'll refresh in the environment. And that's how you replicate consistency, right? I've got a baseline, I know that works. It's going to force me to pick values at the tenant level. We're showing you those values rather than GUIDs, so you don't really make a mistake. You've got your playbook notes as you go along, and then everything just shows up here.
Great, thanks, Robbie. Well, Robbie, we are over time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time on the call as well. Apologies for some of the visual problems we are having, guys. We will be having exactly what Robbie is showing available as some sort of demo snippets on our YouTube channel very soon. So keep an eye out for that. You can kind of go in and check it out there. Just to wrap things up, Robbie, we've got a few questions. Just want to make sure get answered. So Daniel was asking a while back, is there a way to force re-registration when you switch from per user MFA to conditional access? For per user, we get requests, then users switch phones or have another reason for delete the information for them to re-register.
The answer is yes.
There we go.
The question is where, and I forget. But I believe it has to do with the authentication method somewhere. Maybe someone else knows and wants to put it in. Because I know right now you're being stuck having to delete the device and then they re-add it, but there is a way to simply force re-registration. And will we have him in the chat? Send us your email, we'll find it. Honestly, I remember hunting for it last time, finding it, and then I constantly forget. It's in an awkward spot, unfortunately.
There we are. Thanks, Daniel. You've got your email. Anonymous attendee asked, do templates store trusted IPs as locations, or are those left blank that you will need to go back later and fill in later?
And we did, yeah, so that's what you saw, right? I was able to pick my location as I'm going along in order to deploy it throughout the flow. So you're not having to go back in conditional access. The only thing that you'll have to go back for, and I'm using someone's recommendation here. I think they just reminded us where it is. You go
Yeah,
here and
Jerry's saying it's in the registration
pick
camp.
a user, then pick the authentication message, and here's your require multi-factor authentication. So I won't email you. Here it
There we
is.
go. Lots of folks there. Jason's got an
Yeah.
answer for you. Brabant, like coming together, helping out each other. Great to see. One other anonymous attendee is asking, I'm assuming this is an additional license to get access to build policies in Augmentt. It's grayed out for me. So this is part of our autopilot functionality, yes, which is a different license tier. So whoever that is, anonymous attendee, feel free to reach out to your Augmentt rep. If you're not sure who that is, float me a message in the chat and I can get you a contact email to reach out so that you can certainly at least get a trial unlocked for this so you can start using it and see if you want to upgrade your license pack.
It includes conditional access, our security configuration baselines, API access as well if you want that, the Microsoft license report, and our one-click remediation capabilities.
There you go. Right, guys. Well, as I mentioned, we are over time, but thank you so much for everyone for joining us for this webinar. Hope you find it beneficial and educational. For anyone who joined late, don't worry, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand as well. So you will get a recording link in the coming days if you want to go back and review anything as well. Robbie, any final comments from you?
Yeah, if you ever want to see more specific content, shoot us suggestions, and we're happy to build out content to help you guys.
Wonderful. Okay, guys, thanks so much for your time today. And look out for that follow-up email with the recording and some other tidbits of information. Have a lovely Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.